The Wheel We Keep Turning, Dependent Origination, the Five Hindrances, and the Human Heart in Buddhist Practice by the Backyard Buddhist. Whoever sees dependent origination sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. The Buddha, Majjhima Nikaya 28. There are teachings in Buddhism that feel abstract at first glance. Dense forests of Sanskrit and Pali terminology, diagrams of cosmological causation, and long chains of philosophical principles that can seem very far removed from ordinary life. And then there are teachings that, once they sink in, suddenly explain almost everything about why we suffer. Dependent origination is one of those teachings. The Buddha considered it absolutely central, not peripheral, not symbolic, not merely philosophical. He treated it as a direct insight into the mechanics of suffering itself. If karma explains why consequences ripen, dependent origination explains how the machinery works. And strangely enough, the more I've studied it over the years, the less abstract it's become. I've seen it in my own anxiety, in my attachments, in my anger, in the stories I tell myself, in grief, in resentment, in hope, in addiction to comfort, in the endless way the mind manufactures me and mine. The teaching of the 12-fold chain of dependent origination, what Buddhists call Paṭicca-samuppāda in Sanskrit or Paṭicca-samuppāda in Pali, is not merely about rebirth after death. It's about the rebirth happening in our minds every moment of every day. And standing in the middle of that spinning wheel are the five hindrances, those familiar clouds of craving, aversion, laziness, agitation, and doubt that every meditator encounters almost immediately. The 12 links explain the structure of delusion. The five hindrances explain how we experience that delusion psychologically. Together, they form one of the most penetrating analyses of the human condition ever articulated. What is dependent origination? At its simplest, dependent origination means this being that becomes, from the arising of this that arises, this not being that does not become, from the cessation of this that ceases. Samyutta Nikaya 12.61, nothing exists independently. Everything arises due to causes and conditions. This sounds simple enough until we begin to understand the implications. The Buddha was not merely saying that physical events have causes. Everybody already knew that. Seeds produce trees, rain fills rivers, fire creates smoke. The Buddha was pointing toward something far deeper. The self we cling to is also conditioned. Our emotions are conditioned, our identities are conditioned, our fears are conditioned. Even our experience of reality itself is conditioned. We are processes pretending to be permanent objects. And because we mistake flowing processes for fixed selves, suffering arises, the 12 links of dependent origination. The traditional formulation presents 12 interconnected links or nidanas. These are often depicted as a wheel because each condition gives rise to the next, perpetuating samsaric existence. Let's walk through them slowly and humanly. 1. Ignorance, avidya. Everything begins here. Not stupidity, not lack of information. Ignorance in Buddhism means fundamentally misunderstanding reality. Specifically, believing the impermanent to be permanent, believing the non-self to be self, believing conditioned things can permanently satisfy us. This ignorance is existential. It's the mistaken conviction that there is a solid I at the center of experience. Zen teachers often point directly at this. Eihei Dogen famously wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Ignorance is not merely not knowing, it's clinging batu. Volitional formations, sankhara. Because we misunderstand reality, we generate habitual mental formations, conditioned reactions, karmic tendencies, emotional reflexes. These are the grooves we wear into consciousness through repetition. Fear creates defensive patterns. Desire creates grasping patterns. Anger creates reactive patterns. We become creatures of momentum. 3. Consciousness, vijnana. Conditioned tendencies shape consciousness itself. The Buddha does not treat consciousness as a fixed soul. Instead, consciousness is dynamic, contingent, and dependently arisen. This is where many Mahayana schools, especially Yogacara thought, elaborate deeply. Yogacara philosophers propose the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, as a kind of karmic repository in which habitual tendencies accumulate like seeds awaiting conditions to sprout. This is not a soul in the Western sense. It's continuity without permanence, like a flame passed from candle to candle. 4. Name and form, namarupa. Mind and body arise together. Experience becomes structured into mental and physical existence. Nama refers to psychological processes, feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention. Rupa refers to physical form. The Buddha saw human existence as psychophysical, not a soul trapped in a body, but an interdependent process. The six sense bases, sarayatana. The six sense faculties emerge: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Notice that Buddhism includes the mind itself as a sense organ. Thoughts are treated as sensory events. That's an extraordinary insight. A thought is not necessarily you, it's an appearance in awareness. 6. Contact, sparsha. Sense organs encounter objects. Eye meets form, ear meets sound, mind meets thought, and contact occurs. Simple enough. But this is where things begin accelerating. 7. Feeling, vedana. From contact comes feeling tone. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. This is not emotion yet. It's the raw, instinctive flavoring of experience. Meditation reveals how quickly the mind reacts here. Pleasant, grasp it. Painful, reject it. Neutral, ignore it. Most of samsara unfolds automatically from this moment onward. The critical turning point. Many Buddhist teachers emphasize that liberation becomes possible precisely at the level of feeling, because what usually comes next is craving. But it does not have to. This is why mindfulness matters so profoundly. 8. Craving, tushna. The word literally means thirst. We thirst for pleasure, existence, non-existence, certainty, identity, escape. The Buddha declared craving to be the origin of suffering in the Four Noble Truths. And craving is subtle. We don't merely crave things, we crave versions of ourselves. 9. Clinging, upadana. Craving hardens into attachment. Now we identify with desires, my opinion, my trauma, my status, my spirituality, my suffering. Even awakening itself can become an attachment. Zen has always been particularly fierce about this. Linji Yishuan said, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Not blasphemy, detachment. Don't cling even to holy images, bought 10. Becoming, bhava. Clinging produces becoming. Identity crystallizes. Habitual karma deepens. We become the stories we rehearse. In psychological language, this is self-construction. In Buddhist language, it is samsaric momentum. 11. Birth, jati. A self is born, not only literally through rebirth, but moment to moment psychologically. The angry self is born. The fearful self is born. The jealous self is born. Again and again. 12. Aging and death, jaramara. Everything conditioned passes away. All constructed identities dissolve, and because we cling to them as permanent, sorrow follows. Thus the wheel turns. The Five Hindrances. If dependent origination explains the architecture of samsara, the Five Hindrances explain what it feels like from the inside. These are the primary obstacles to meditation and awakening. The Buddha described them repeatedly throughout the Nikayas. 1. Sensual desire, kamacchanda. The mind runs toward pleasure, food, comfort, entertainment, validation, fantasy. The problem is not beauty itself. The problem is addiction to stimulation. In meditation, this manifests as daydreaming and chasing pleasant states. The Pure Land traditions often interpret this very compassionately. Rather than expecting ordinary beings to completely eradicate desire through self-power alone, traditions stemming from Shinran emphasize reliance upon the vow of Amitabha Buddha. Shinran famously referred to himself as neither monk nor layman. He saw human beings as profoundly karmically entangled, and yet embraced by boundless compassion nonetheless. 2. Ill will, epat. Hatred, resentment. The mind pushing reality away. This hindrance feeds directly from unpleasant feeling in the chain of dependent origination. Something hurts. We resist. Resistance hardens into hostility. Zen often counters this through radical intimacy with experience, not fleeing discomfort, not decorating it, just meeting it completely. 3. Sloth and torpor, thinata. Spiritual dullness, heaviness, sleepiness, apathy. Every meditator knows this one. The Buddha did not regard it merely as fatigue. Sometimes it reflects existential resistance, a refusal to awaken fully. 4. Restlessness and worry, udaka kukuka, the agitated mind, regret, future thinking, anxiety loops. Modern society practically industrializes this hindrance. Our devices monetize distraction. The mind becomes incapable of stillness, bought 5. Doubt, not healthy inquiry, paralyzing spiritual indecision. Am I doing this right? Does any of this matter? What if awakening isn't possible? Ironically, doubt often masks fear of transformation. because genuine practice changes us, and ego resists dissolution. How different Buddhist schools understand these teachings. One of the beauties of Buddhism is that the same truths are approached through many lenses. Theravāda Buddhism. Theravāda tends to emphasize dependent origination in both moment to moment psychological terms, literal rebirth across lifetimes. The five hindrances are treated very practically. Meditation manuals like the Visuddhimagga analyze them with remarkable precision. Mindfulness is used surgically. Identify the hindrance, observe its causes, weaken its grip, cultivate opposing qualities. The emphasis is experiential and analytical. Zen Buddhism Soto school and Rinzai school often approach these teachings less conceptually and more directly. The chain itself is real, but Zen warns against turning Buddhism into intellectual architecture. Zen asks, who is experiencing the chain? What is craving before thought names it? What is awareness itself? For Zen, dependent origination points toward emptiness, because if everything arises dependently, then nothing possesses independent fixed essence. This becomes the Mahayana doctrine of shunyata. Nagarjuna wrote, whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. This is not nihilism. It is relational existence. Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism integrates dependent origination into an immense cosmological and psychological framework. The 12 links are often depicted visually in the Bhava Chakra, the Wheel of Life. Tibetan systems frequently examine the subtle layers of consciousness and karmic continuity with extraordinary detail. The hindrances are addressed through meditation, visualization, mantra, ethical discipline, guru devotion, insight practices, but fundamentally the same mechanism is recognized. Ignorance gives rise to suffering. Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land traditions introduce something profoundly moving into this conversation, the recognition of spiritual limitation. Rather than assuming most beings can extinguish craving through meditative mastery alone, Pure Land teachers emphasize reliance upon compassion beyond the ego. The recitation of the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, becomes an expression of entrusting oneself to awakening. In this sense, the hindrances themselves become evidence of our need for grace-like compassion. Shinran did not deny karmic conditioning. He practically drowned in awareness of it. Yet he believed that awakening remains accessible precisely because compassion is infinite. Nichiren Buddhism. Nichiren centered practice upon devotion to the Lotus Sutra. For Nichiren traditions, dependent origination demonstrates the interconnectedness of all phenomena and the immediacy of Buddhahood within ordinary existence. The chanting of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is understood as aligning oneself directly with ultimate reality. Interestingly, Nichiren thought often interprets delusion and enlightenment as non-dual in potential. Even the hindrances themselves can become gateways to awakening when transformed through practice. That is a very Mahayana insight. The poison becomes medicine, the psychological brilliance of the teaching. What astonishes me most about dependent origination is how psychologically modern it feels. The Buddha recognized conditioned behavior, subconscious patterning, emotional reactivity, cognitive construction, identity formation, reinforcement loops, 2.5 millennia before modern psychology. He observed that suffering is not random, it is patterned, and what is patterned can be interrupted. That's the great hope hidden inside this teaching. The wheel turns mechanically until awareness enters the process. Mindfulness creates friction in samsara, meditation and interrupting the chain. This is why Zazen matters, not because sitting itself is magical, but because stillness reveals causation. We begin seeing contact, feeling, craving, clinging in real time, and eventually a small space appears, a pause. A breath, the machinery slows. This is liberation beginning, not through violence toward ourselves, not through spiritual perfectionism, but through seeing clearly. In the seen, there is only the seen. Bahia Sutta. That's simple and impossibly difficult. The compassion hidden inside the teaching. Dependent origination is sometimes portrayed as cold philosophy. I don't experience it that way at all. I think it is one of the most compassionate teachings ever offered. Because it tells us you are not broken beyond repair. You are conditioned. And conditioned things can change. Hatred can soften, fear can unwind, attachment can loosen, compassion can grow. Nothing fixed exists at the center of suffering, which means suffering itself is not absolute. A backyard Buddhist reflection. The older I get, the less I think enlightenment is about becoming some kind of spiritually perfected human being floating 6 inches above the earth in perpetual serenity. I think awakening may have more to do with intimacy, seeing the wheel turning without needing to pretend it isn't, watching craving arise without immediately obeying it, meeting grief without becoming only grief, meeting anger without building a permanent self out of anger. The Buddha didn't merely diagnose suffering, he diagnosed the mechanism. And somewhere inside seeing the mechanism clearly, compassion emerges, not only for ourselves, but for everybody. Because once you see dependent origination deeply enough, blame starts dissolving. You begin seeing frightened conditioning everywhere. You see people trapped in causes and conditions they barely understand. And strangely enough, that realization can break the heart open, not into despair, into mercy. Maybe that's why the Buddha placed wisdom and compassion side by side. Because to truly understand dependent origination is to understand how fragile, conditioned, and interconnected we all are. The wheel turns everywhere. And every now and then, through practice, stillness, prayer, chanting, mindfulness, grace, zazen, nembutsu, daimoku, or simple acts of kindness, someone reaches gently into the spokes and suffering pauses, even if only for a moment. That moment matters.